Hello class, so this lecture is on photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is from the Greek word photo, which means produced by light, synthesis, which means a whole made of parts put together. So the main definition for photosynthesis is the process whereby plants, algae, some bacteria use the energy of the sun to synthesize organic compounds such as sugars from inorganic compounds such as carbon dioxide and water. And if you remember from the previous lecture talking about the citric acid cycle, we noticed that we have carbon dioxide and water that is being produced. So that is all feeding within the circle of carbon and oxygen type of cycle that I mentioned previously. And so as far as an overview of photosynthesis, it takes water and takes in light and does a light dependent type of reaction. And since energy is being absorbed, this is an endergonic type of reaction. And so what it produces is oxygen, NADPH, and ATP. And this light reaction takes in ADP plus inorganic phosphate, and then also NAD plus, which act as a oxidizer. Okay, and then the NADH is an electron carrier. And this feeds into the Calvin cycle. So we're going to talk more about the Calvin cycle in later lectures. But that Calvin cycle takes up ATP and NADH from the light reaction and also takes in carbon dioxide. And thus from there, the carbon dioxide, there is a reduction of it to form this glucose. So the net overall equation for photosynthesis is taking carbon dioxide plus water, including light, and then from there produce sugar and oxygen. That is the main products for photosynthesis, the sugar and the oxygen. And remember, there is two stages for it. One is a light reactions, which is a light dependent type of reaction, and then the Calvin cycle, which is light independent type of reaction. And so we see here a plant cell. And so where all of this photosynthesis is happening is in the chloroplast. And so looking more deeper inside of the chloroplast, you have the stroma, which is right here, which is the space and aqueous solution enclosed within the inner membrane of the chloroplast. This is not including the contents of the thylakoid membranes, which you see right here, those discs. That is not what the stroma solution is actually located inside of the thylakoid. It's not there. It's all on the outside. And so with the stroma, the aqueous solution contains most of the soluble enzyme required for the carbon dioxide assimilation reaction, which is the Calvin cycle. So we'll notate that the Calvin cycle is actually happening within the stroma. Now, as far as the light reaction, that is happening in the thylakoid. So a thylakoid, which is represented as this disc, is a closed continuous system of flattened disc formed by the pigments bearing internal membranes of chloroplast. Thylakoid membranes provide a large area for the machinery of photophosphorylation, which is ATP synthesis driven by light, and then the photosynthetic pigments and enzyme complexes that carry out the light dependent reaction and ATP synthesis. And so, in order, you have this light that is shining. In order for this thylakoid membrane to absorb this light, it uses pigments. So the main pigments that absorb the light is chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and bacterial chlorophyll. And so these structures are listed here. So what you see originally right here is the chlorophyll A, but if you replace this group with this group right here, this ketone, that makes it a bacterial chlorophyll. But if this methyl group is just replaced with a aldehyde group, then you have a chlorophyll B. But notice that all three of these pigments have this polycyclic type of planar structure, and you have this magnesium metal ion that is in the center. And so what the major pigments cannot absorb, that's where the secondary photopigments come in to play, and these are accessory pigments in plants. So accessory pigments absorb light at wavelengths not absorbed by the chlorophylls, and thus are supplementary light receptors. They also protect downstream components from a highly reactive form of oxygen, which is called singlet oxygen, that is formed when intense light exceeds the system capacity to accept electrons. And so actually singlet oxygen is used for certain cancer type of treatment. So skin cancer treatment, they use something that's called a photosynthesizer, and it actually generates singlet oxygen that kills all the cells that is around it. And so they try to utilize this property to actually kill cancer cells on the skin for certain patients. And so this is some more general information as far as other accessory type of pigments. And this particular one is located in the cyanobacteria and red algae. And so since we're talking about light, we need to kind of understand or just do a review of the properties of light. So light moves in waves in energy units called photons. And so the energy of photons is inversely proportional to its wavelength. And so when we want to quantify this energy of the photon, it utilizes this Planck's equation, which means right here you have a single photon energy is equal to the Planck's constant, and then from here this part is the frequency of the light. And so that frequency of the light can be broken down into speed of light divided by the wavelength of light. And so as the sunlight is around the plant, notice that all of these pigments is trying to absorb as much of the sunlight energy as much as possible. And so plants are green because their pigments absorb light from the red and blue regions of the spectrum, leaving primarily green light to be reflected. The combination of chlorophylls A and B and accessory pigments enables plants to harvest most of the energy available in sunlight. The relative amounts of chlorophylls and accessory pigments are characteristics of a particular plant species. And so as far as when light is being absorbed, what is happening is at a very specific wavelength, it is being absorbed and the electron gets excited into the excited state, and then as it goes back down to its resting state, it actually releases that energy to its neighboring electron pairs, and thus that electron pair gets excited and then keeps on transferring energy, transferring energy. So this is one thing that students tend to get confused when dealing with energy being moved around within the plant. So electrons are not moving. What is actually moving is the energy. The electrons are just getting excited and then releasing it to the neighboring electron that is at its resting state. And that gets excited, go back to its resting state and transfer that energy to the next neighboring electron. And as it travels and travels, that is what's happening. The energy is being transferred over, not the actual electrons moving. And so this is the depiction, which is where the confusion usually lies. They think that it's just electrons that's just moving around like this. Like, no, it's not electrons. It's just energy. And so these little boxes, this represents the chlorophylls, the ones that absorb all of the energy. And then this is the disc. You have that thylakoid, and then these pigments, which are like receptors, are taking in that energy and trying to get it moving towards the reaction center of the thylakoid, where it ends up interacting within the membrane of the thylakoid and go more so in depth of having this initiation of electron flow from this photon energy. And so what's happening is once that light hits that reaction center, then it has on the outside protons, which wants to be taken inside of the thylakoid membrane, and thus within the thylakoid membrane you have H2O, which starts to give off its electron and then produces that oxygen, which is one of the products for the light reaction, and thus transfer that electron to NAD+, which produces that NADPH, which I spoke about is another product, but this actual product feeds into the Calvin cycle, and the oxygen is just being released. And once this happens, once you have protons that are being added in, of course there's protons that already inside wants to come out now, and that helps facilitate now the phosphorylation of having ADP to be turned into ATP. And this ATP is used for the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle uses the NADPH and the ATP. So the basic overview, once again, of photosynthesis is you have light, and within this light reaction, it produces ATP and NADPH. And within that light reaction, this is happening within the thylakoid. And what else is being released is oxygen. But as far as the ATP and the NADPH, that goes to the Calvin cycle, which is located in the stroma. And from there produces the carbohydrates, but within the Calvin cycle, it also utilizes carbon dioxide to help have this reduction into a carbohydrate. And that concludes the lecture on photosynthesis.